Chapter 5. For an Empire, the Warbrain's masterpiece. If Greece was the experiment, Rome was the execution. Where the Greeks fractured into city-states, Rome absorbed. Where Athens debated and Sparta drilled, Rome engineered. Where Alexander spread culture and genes through conquest, Rome institutionalized conquest itself. For nearly 1,000 years, Rome was the Warbrain's grandest laboratory, a machine that organized tens of millions of humans under one banner, all while ensuring conflict never ceased. The Romans told themselves stories of divine origin. They traced their bloodline to Aeneas, the Trojan who fled to Italy after Troy's fall. They claimed Mars, god of war, as the father of Romulus and Remus, founders of the city. It is no coincidence that the Roman myth begins with wolves, violence, and fratricide. The Warbrain wrote itself into their origin. Brother kills brother. War creates the city. Conquest secures belonging. To be Roman was to descend from blood. From the beginning, Rome was structured as a state of conflict. Its citizens were soldiers. Every man who owned land was obligated to fight. Service in the legions was not a burden, but identity itself. To march in phalanx or cohort, to raise a shield wall, to swear loyalty to the eagle. This was belonging, and the Warbrain demanded that belonging be sharpened through constant campaigns. Early Rome fought its Italian neighbors ceaselessly, then Carthage, then Greece, then Gaul, then everyone. Every victory fed loyalty, every defeat threatened disintegration. Rome invented citizenship as a tool of expansion. At first, to be Roman was exclusive, only those born in the city. But as Rome conquered Italy, it faced a problem. Millions of subjects who might rebel. The solution was simple. Genius. Make them Roman too. Extend citizenship, sometimes fully, sometimes partially. Enlist them in the legions. Let them share in spoils. Bind them to the system. What seemed like magnanimity was code. Underline the circle. Not by dissolving hostility, but by turning outsiders into insiders who would fight against the next outsiders. Citizenship was belonging, weaponized. The Warbrain thrived in the Roman army, its most perfect instrument yet. The legions were machines of cohesion. 10 cohorts, each broken into centuries, each commanded by centurions who drilled loyalty and discipline into the flesh of men. A Roman soldier was not an individual. He was a cog in a formation. To desert was death. To break the line was death. To advance together was survival. The Warbrain wrote obedience into their muscles, rituals into their camp life, and loyalty into their oaths. Legionaries swore not to Rome abstractly, but to their general, their eagle, their brothers in arms. Rome's roads were more than marvels of engineering. They were arteries of war, built by legions, paved with stone, stretching across mountains and rivers. They allowed armies to march at impossible speeds. To merchants they looked like trade routes, to pilgrims like paths of culture. But the OS had a different use in mind. Rapid mobilization, faster conquest, tighter cohesion. All roads lead to Rome was not sentiment. It was code. Law too was drafted into service. The 12 tables, the Republic's decrees, and later imperial law, promised fairness and order. Humans told themselves they had transcended vendetta, that justice no longer required blood feud, but law was simply vengeance standardized, hostility ritualized. Crucifixion made public spectacle of rebellion. Courts reinforced hierarchy. Citizen against slave, Roman against barbarian. Even the vaunted Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was not peace at all. It was the silence of crushed provinces, the order imposed by legions. The OS had dressed brutality in the robes of law. Rome's gods were no different. Jupiter thundered like Zeus. Mars demanded war. Venus promised desire. Rituals, sacrifices, auguries, all ensured cohesion. Yet as Rome expanded, even religion became a tool of assimilation. Conquered peoples kept their gods, but those gods were folded into Rome's pantheon. It was not tolerance, it was absorption. The war brain understood that belonging scales more smoothly when symbols are integrated rather than destroyed. Rome became a sponge, soaking up gods from every land, but always keeping Mars at the center. When philosophy came to Rome, imported from Greece, it too was bent. Stoicism taught self-control, virtue, and universal brotherhood. It might have been a rewrite, a chance to transcend hostility. But what did Rome do? Its emperors quoted Stoic wisdom while commanding slaughter. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, wrote meditations on reason and kindness while campaigning on the Danube, crushing tribes, feeding thousands of men to the war machine. Philosophy became solace for individuals, irrelevant against the OS's demands. Christianity was the boldest attempt yet to break the cycle. Love your enemies, turn the other cheek. The meek shall inherit the earth. If truly lived, this creed could have erased the war brain, but Rome co-opted it. The faith of martyrs became the faith of emperors. Constantine carried the cross into battle. Crusades were launched in Christ's name. The message of peace was converted into a new banner of hostility. The OS had absorbed even love. Rome's collapse is often told as tragedy, corruption, decadence, barbarian invasions. But from the OS's perspective, collapse was continuity. The empire fractured, but its code endured. Germanic tribes adopted Roman law, Roman religion, Roman hierarchy. The war brain simply shifted its laboratory from empire to kingdoms, from Caesar to Pope, from legions to feudal armies. The board game continued. The lesson of Rome is the lesson of humanity itself. Every attempt to transcend the war brain is hijacked. Citizenship, law, philosophy, religion, all were bent. The empire's greatness, its endurance, its genius were real, but they were never independent. They were expressions of the OS, moving pawns across the board, trading lives for infrastructure, blood for roads, bodies for belonging. Rome imagined itself eternal. Roma Aeterna, they called it. But it was only one more iteration, one more grand experiment, one more pawn. The war brain was eternal, not Rome, and when Rome fell, the OS was already whispering to the next pawns, already writing the next scripts, already preparing the next stage of the game. Blending bloodlines across continents, the war brain had already rehearsed its experiments in Greece, crafting city-states to fracture belonging, driving Athens and Sparta into suspicion, and creating the stage for philosophy, art, and war. But Greece was still a fragmented laboratory. The experiment had shown promise, but the war brain required more. It needed scale, a force that could move entire populations, bind millions into one system, and most importantly, blend bloodlines across continents. Out of this demand, Rome was born. To human eyes, Rome looked like destiny. Farmers on the banks of the Tiber River forged a republic, expanded across Italy, and built an empire that stretched from the cold moors of Britain to the sands of Arabia. To the war brain, Rome was not destiny, but design. It was the perfect instrument for scaling belonging into something larger than tribes, cities, or even nations. Rome was the war brain's masterpiece, an empire of roads, laws, legions, and gods that spread not only power, but people. Every conquest, every garrison, every soldier's march across Europe and the Mediterranean was also a biological project. Rome was not only an empire of armies, it was an empire of children. The Roman legions are remembered as disciplined, iron-willed, unstoppable. But discipline was only half their purpose. The other half was dispersal. Each legionnaire carried not only a sword, but his seed. Wherever Rome expanded, soldiers mixed with local women, whether through marriage, prostitution, coercion, or rape. The war brain ensured it happened in every territory: Gaul, Iberia, Britannia, Germania, North Africa, the Balkans, the Levant. Everywhere the Eagle Standards marched, they left more than forts behind. They left genetic diversity, new generations born from blended stock, stronger immune systems, new variations of traits, resilience against disease. Soldiers believed they fought for glory, plunder, or Caesar. In truth, they were unwitting couriers of evolution, pawns in the war brain's long game of survival. Roman leaders thought themselves masters of the world. They wore crowns of laurel, sat in marble halls, and commanded vast armies. Yet they too were pawns. Julius Caesar believed he conquered Gaul for wealth and prestige. In reality, the war brain pushed him to drive millions of men across France, Belgium, and into Britain, scattering Roman blood with Celtic, Germanic, and Iberian women. Augustus believed he was building a Pax Romana, a peace enforced by Roman law. But the war brain's peace was always temporary, a pause between expansions, just long enough for populations to intermingle before the next conflict. Rome's emperors thought they made choices. In reality, they played the roles written for them, each one a figurehead in the war brain's biological and technological project. Rome's roads are celebrated as feats of engineering, arteries of trade, monuments to civilization, but they were built first for war and second for migration. The Appian Way carried legions south to crush revolts, but it also carried those legions' offspring into villages along the way. Roads stretched across Gaul and Spain, linking distant towns to the capital, but also linking people to people, enabling marriages, liaisons, and encounters that would have been impossible without Rome's infrastructure. To humanize, these were roads of commerce and power. To the war brain, they were veins, pumping genetic diversity through the body of Europe. Roman law, too, was a tool disguised as progress. The 12 tables, the codices, the imperial decrees all promised fairness, order, and predictability. But law also defined who belonged and who did not. Citizenship, once rare, was gradually extended to allies, conquered peoples, and eventually to nearly every free man in the empire. Historians call this a stroke of genius, a way to unify a vast, diverse population. Yet the deeper logic was simpler. More citizens meant more soldiers meant more movement, and more movement meant more genetic dispersal. To grant citizenship was not just a political act, it was a biological one, ensuring that Italian, Gallic, African, Syrian, and Iberian bloodlines would mix within one system. What looked like political inclusion was, in truth, the war brain's mechanism for biological strengthening. Religion in Rome also served the OS. At first, Roman gods were local, tied to hearth and field. But as the empire grew, gods multiplied. Jupiter absorbed Zeus. Isis was brought from Egypt, Mithras from Persia. Religious festivals became spectacles of belonging, massive rituals binding millions of strangers into one imagined community. Yet even religion was not immune to hijacking. When Christianity spread, preaching love of enemies and peace, it might have rewritten the operating system. But the war brain seized it, turned crosses into battle standards, and baptized conquest in holy water. What could have been a code of peace became yet another rallying cry for armies. Rome's enemies believed they resisted empire. Germanic tribes fought Roman legions in forests. Parthians pushed back in deserts, and Jews revolted in Judea. But even resistance served the war brain. Wars forced migrations, resettlements, enslavements. Prisoners were marched to Rome, paraded in triumph, and sold into slavery. Every slave brought into Italy was another infusion of foreign blood, another chance for genetic variation. The war brain did not care whether Rome won or lost a battle. What mattered was that populations kept moving, mingling, reproducing under new conditions. Even Rome's spectacles, its gladiatorial games, revealed a hand of the OS. Humans think they watched for entertainment, that emperors staged games to distract the masses. But the deeper function was training. The Colosseum was a rehearsal of death, conditioning Romans to cheer for slaughter, to accept violence as normal, to see blood not as horror, but as necessity. The war brain needed humans to remain obedient to its cycle of conflict. Gladiators, like soldiers, were pawns in this education. As centuries passed, the empire expanded, contracted, and expanded again. Each campaign against Carthage, against Gaul, against Parthia, was another move on the war-brain's board. The Punic Wars destroyed Carthage, but ensured that Roman settlers spread into North Africa. Caesar's conquest of Gaul killed millions, but ensured that Roman and Celtic populations blended permanently. Trajan's campaigns in Dacia brought new wealth, but also resettled thousands across the Danube frontier. Rome was less a state than a machine, a genetic and cultural mixing engine, disguised as empire. Eventually, of course, Rome fell. Historians debate why. Corruption, decadence, economic strain, invasions, Christianity, overextension. But from the perspective of the war brain, collapse was not failure, it was transition. The empire had already served its purpose. It had connected continents, spread genes, accelerated technology, built roads and aqueducts, seeded Europe with Latin languages, Roman law, and mixed populations. Once the work was done, Rome was allowed to dissolve. Barbarians stormed its gates, provinces broke away, emperors faded into history. But the war brain had already moved on, preparing its next laboratory in the kingdoms, crusades, and empires that would follow. Rome's legacy is not marble ruins or Latin poetry. Its legacy is blood. The billions of descendants who walk Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa today carry Roman genes. The echoes of soldiers, settlers, slaves, and citizens mingled under the eagle standards. Humans think of empire as politics, as glory, as history. But empire was always biology. Rome was the war brain's largest experiment to date, a continent-spanning machine for mixing humanity into a stronger, more resilient whole. And this is the truth humans still refuse to see. Leaders were pawns. Emperors thought they ruled, but they obeyed. Generals thought they planned, but they executed code. Citizens thought they belonged, but they were conscripted into the OS's larger project. Rome is remembered as civilization's pinnacle, but it was only the warbrain's laboratory, a blood-soaked forge preparing humanity for what came next. The pawns of the Republic. Rome is remembered as glory. Rome is remembered as empire. Rome is remembered as the pinnacle of civilization. But strip away the marble, the aqueducts, the speeches of Cicero, and the poetry of Virgil, and what remains is simpler. Rome was the war brain's greatest machine. The city on the Tiber was not destined to rule the world. It was chosen, crafted, pushed. From its earliest days as a cluster of huts among hills, Rome carried inside it the perfect ingredients for expansion. Location gave it rivers and trade. Neighbors gave it enemies. Its people gave it resilience. But the true driver was not geography or ingenuity. It was the same hidden operating system that had guided tribes, that had manipulated city-states, that had deceived Greece. The war brain looked at Rome and saw a laboratory ready to be scaled. Rome's republic was born not of freedom, but of conflict. Patricians and plebeians fought endlessly for rights, laws, and power. Human historians celebrate this as the birth of democracy. But even here, the war brain was guiding events. Division created energy. Rivalry created urgency. To resolve disputes, Romans codified laws on bronze tablets, not because they loved fairness, but because conflict demanded order. Law in Rome was always sharpened on the whetstone of violence. When Rome fought its Italian neighbors, the Etruscans, Latins, Samnites, it did not simply conquer, it absorbed. Enemies were crushed, yes, but also offered partial citizenship, marriage rights, land. This was not magnanimity, it was programming. By binding outsiders to Rome, the war brain ensured blood would mingle. Each defeated tribe became not just subject, but kin. Soldiers from these peoples were conscripted into legions, marched far from their homes, and left descendants in foreign lands. Every treaty, every grant of citizenship, every land allotment was part of a deeper design. Spread the blood. Roman leaders thought themselves clever. They believed their alliances, their Senate debates, their patronage networks held the Republic together. But none of them saw the larger board. They did not see that their very system of compromise and rivalry was only a tool to keep the machine running. Conflict feeding expansion, expansion feeding belonging, belonging feeding new conflicts. The Punic Wars. Fire across the sea. The Punic Wars are remembered as Rome's great struggle against Carthage. 3 epic conflicts fought across a century. But to the war brain, they were not epics. They were necessities. When Hannibal marched elephants over the Alps, Romans believed they fought for survival. In truth, the war brain had already written the outcome. Rome had to fight Carthage because only Carthage could unlock the western Mediterranean. Grain, silver, seaports and shipping lanes were prizes, yes, but more important was the movement of people. Conquering Carthage scattered its populations across the empire, sending Punic blood into Roman veins. North Africa was drawn into Europe's orbit, blending genes, ideas, and technologies. Rome's destruction of Carthage, burning the city, enslaving its people, salting the earth, is often cited as brutality beyond measure. But in the war brain's calculus, even annihilation was useful. Slaves marched into Italy. Carthaginian women bore children by Roman masters. Cultures intermingled in markets and households. The war brain did not care about Carthage's survival as a polity. It cared about humanity's survival as a species. The laboratory had expanded, and that was enough. Caesar's conquest of Gaul. No episode better reveals the OS than Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul. Over 8 years, Caesar slaughtered and enslaved millions, crossing rivers, storming hill forts, and writing his famous commentaries to boast of it all. To human eyes, this was ambition, politics, personal glory. To the war brain, it was biology. Gaul was a vast reservoir of people, tribes speaking Celtic tongues, living in fortified villages, practicing their own rituals. Left alone, they might have remained distinct for centuries. Conquered, they were scattered. Roman soldiers married local women. Slaves were dragged to Italy. Towns were Romanized, mixing languages, customs, and genes. Caesar believed he was making himself indispensable to Rome. In reality, he was serving the OS, ensuring that millions of Gauls became part of the Roman bloodstream. Even Caesar's invasion of Britain, a place he never fully conquered, served this purpose. Soldiers crossed the Channel, clashed with local tribes, and left their imprint. Britain would not fall fully into Rome's grasp until later, but the seed had been planted. The war brain's code was simple. Every march, every conquest, every settlement was another infusion of variation. Roads, walls, and the march of genes. Fran roads are often praised as engineering marvels. Straight, durable, stretching for miles, they carried legions, merchants, and messages with unprecedented speed. But the deeper function was not movement of goods. It was movement of people. When legions marched to distant frontiers, they built roads behind them. Those roads allowed settlers to follow, colonists to plant towns, families to move where once only soldiers went. A soldier might be garrisoned in Britain for 20 years. When discharged, he might marry a local woman, settle on land, and raise children who were half Roman, half Briton. Multiply this by hundreds of thousands, and you have the war brain's quiet project unfolding beneath the noise of war. Even Rome's walls. Hadrian's Wall in Britain. The limes along the Rhine and Danube served the OS. They defined boundaries, yes, but they also created crossings, zones of exchange where soldiers, traders, and locals mingled. No wall ever truly kept people apart. It only intensified the mixing at its gates. Law, citizenship, and identity. The extension of Roman citizenship is hailed as one of history's great political innovations. Beginning as a privilege of the city itself, citizenship expanded over centuries until Caracalla granted it to all free men of the empire in 212 CE. To humans, this looked like inclusion, generosity, fairness. To the war brain, it was logistics. Citizenship created obligation, taxes, military service, loyalty. But more importantly, it dissolved distinctions. Italians, Gauls, Spaniards, Syrians, Africans, all became Romans. Once they shared identity, they shared blood. Roman citizenship was not merely legal fiction, it was genetic engineering at the scale of empire. The emperors as pawns. Rome's emperors are remembered as titans of history. Augustus, the founder. Trajan, the conqueror. Hadrian, the builder. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher. Constantine, the Christian. Some were noble, some cruel, some brilliant, some mad. Yet all of them were pawns. Augustus believed he created peace. In truth, the Pax Romana was only a pause, a period when the OS allowed populations to stabilize before new conflicts. Trajan thought he extended Rome's glory into Dacia and Mesopotamia. In reality, he dispersed more genes, spread more cultures, and tied distant peoples into the empire's web. Marcus Aurelius wrote meditations on virtue while slaughtering Germans on the Danube. Constantine embraced Christianity, imagining he had found a universal creed. But Christianity became Rome's next weapon, a banner for armies, a justification for conquest. No emperor, however wise or ruthless, escaped the war brain's script. Each believed he chose his path. Each was only carrying out code. Slaves and spectacle. Slavery in Rome was immense. Millions were enslaved prisoners of war, debtors, children born into bondage. To historians, slavery was economic exploitation. To the war brain, it was another form of forced migration. Slaves moved from Gaul to Italy, from Syria to Spain, from Africa to Britain. They carried languages, customs, and most importantly, their DNA. Many were absorbed into Roman households, fathering children who blurred the lines between master and servant. The gladiatorial games reveal the same logic. Men from across the empire, Thracians, Gauls, Africans, fought in arenas, their blood spilled for crowds. To humans, this was entertainment, cruelty, distraction. But the OS had a subtler purpose. Rome's citizens were trained to normalize violence, to cheer death, to accept the slaughter as part of belonging. The games conditioned Romans to obey the war brain without resistance, collapse as transition. When Rome fell, it seemed apocalypse. The Visigoths sacked the city. The empire fractured into east and west. Barbarians carved new kingdoms. The legions disbanded. To humanize, it was tragedy, the end of civilization. But the war brain saw no tragedy. It saw fulfillment. Rome had already done its work. It had mixed genes across continents. It had built infrastructure that would endure for centuries. It had spread languages, cultures, and religions that would shape millennia. Collapse was not failure. Collapse was release. The OS had squeezed all it could from Rome. Now it moved on, stemming new experiments in Byzantium, in Islam, in Christendom, in the Crusades to come. Rome's true legacy. Rome's legacy is not marble ruins or dusty law codes. Rome's true legacy is the reshaping of humanity itself. The billions of people alive today who trace ancestry to Europe, North Africa, or the Middle East carry Rome in their veins. Not Roman ideals, not Roman glory, but Roman blood. The mingling of tribes under empire, the dispersal of genes through conquest, settlement, and slavery. Humans think they remember Rome as history. The war brain remembers Rome as laboratory. It used Rome to scale humanity up, to blend populations, to prepare the species for the next great cataclysms, the Crusades, the empires, the world wars. Rome was not the end of ancient civilization. It was the midpoint in the OS's endless experiment. Rome's rise was not inevitable, though history makes it appear so. It was a sequence of accidents and clashes, each one nudged forward by the hidden hand of the war brain. Every skirmish on Italy's hills, every clash with Etruscans or Samnites, every compromise between patricians and plebeians served the same purpose: to expand the field of belonging until it covered more ground, more people, and more bloodlines. The Romans did not know they were being guided. They believed they fought for survival, for honor, for their gods, but they were simply pawns moving across the board, each victory or loss fueling the operating system that demanded expansion at all costs. When Rome fought Carthage, the contest seemed like a titanic struggle between two civilizations. The Romans told themselves that they must dominate or be destroyed. The Carthaginians, equally deluded, believed they carried divine favor and mercantile genius. Neither side recognized that the real outcome had already been decided. The Mediterranean had to be unified under one banner. Carthage had to be broken, so its people could be scattered and absorbed, its knowledge redistributed, its bloodlines forced into new unions. The Romans who marched into Africa did not know that they were agents of the war brain, carrying swords, but also carrying seeds. The slaves they dragged home were no less important than the silver and grain. Their descendants would reshape Italy itself, fusing new traits into the Roman stock. Julius Caesar's campaigns in Gaul appear in history as a story of brilliance and ambition. But ambition itself is one of the OS's most reliable tricks. The general who dreams of eternal glory never realizes that his dreams are not his own. Caesar thought he was securing his future. In truth, he was opening the genetic floodgates of an entire region. Gaul's tribes resisted fiercely, but resistance was part of the script. Each village burned, each migration forced, each captured family resettled in Italy, ensured that the bloodlines of Celts and Romans would never again be separate. Even his famous boast, Veni Vidi Vici, could be translated into the OS's language. I came, I spread, I mixed. Soldiers are the war brain's favorite couriers. A legionnaire might be posted to Hispania, Germania, or Judea. He would fight, yes, but he would also live, settle, and leave behind children. The disciplined rows of soldiers marching across Europe were also rivers of DNA, flowing outward from the Italian heartland. Roman commanders never saw this truth. They imagined themselves conquering land, enriching the treasury, securing borders. The OS saw soldiers as instruments for shuffling genes, forcing populations into contact that peace never would have achieved. The roads magnified this process. Roman engineers built them for military logistics, but the result was constant motion. Merchants, families, settlers, slaves, and soldiers crisscrossed the empire. An African woman might find herself in Gaul, a Syrian craftsman in Spain, a German auxiliary in North Africa. The war brain thrives on movement. Every step taken on those stone-paved highways carried the species closer to its hidden goal: resilience through mixture. Roman law, too, can be read as code, written by the OS. To human eyes, it represented fairness, order, civilization. To the OS, it was glue. When citizenship spread beyond the city of Rome, it was not a gesture of generosity, but of control. To be Roman meant to be counted, taxed, and mobilized. It also meant being folded into the larger tribe. By Caracalla's time, the expansion of citizenship to all free men was the logical endpoint. It unified a vast range of peoples under a single label, erasing the distinctions that might have kept them apart. In one stroke, millions became part of a common identity, primed to intermarry, fight, and mix. The humans saw law as progress. The OS saw it as another lever to accelerate integration. The emperors, worshipped as gods or reviled as monsters, were never more than pieces on the board. Augustus thought he created peace, but his so-called Pax Romana was merely the pause the OS required to let populations settle before the next round of upheaval. Trajan's conquests in Dacia and Mesopotamia looked like the work of a brilliant strategist, but they were just the OS opening more territory for intermingling. Marcus Aurelius wrote Meditations on Virtue, even as he slaughtered tribes on the Danube, believing he lived a paradox, when in fact, he was just carrying out the same code as all the others. Constantine's embrace of Christianity seemed like a revolution, but even that was a trick. The creed that preached peace was turned into an imperial banner, an excuse for more wars, more conversions, more forced migrations. The spectacle of the gladiatorial games reveals another layer of control. Men captured from every corner of the empire fought to the death in arenas, their blood spilling before cheering crowds. Romans thought they were entertained. The OS used the games to condition them. Violence became spectacle. Death became routine. Cruelty became identity. By normalizing slaughter, the war brain ensured that citizens would never resist its deeper commands. They would not ask why so many must die. They would only cheer louder. And even here, the genetic project continued. Gladiators were not always killed. Many lived, trained, and sired children. Even in the circus of death, the OS ensured that foreign blood was added to Rome's veins. Slavery was the empire's engine, and the OS's most efficient migration tool. Entire populations were uprooted, sold, scattered, and absorbed. The Romans saw slaves as property, but the OS saw them as carriers. Every slave transported from Africa to Italy, from Syria to Spain, from Gaul to Greece, was a piece of the genetic mosaic. Masters fathered children with enslaved women, willingly or by force. These children blurred lines, softened divisions, and expanded the pool. The war brain did not care about justice or cruelty. It cared about the mixing. Slavery, obscene in human terms, was perfectly efficient in the OS's terms. When Rome finally collapsed, humans wept at the end of civilization. They spoke of the sack of Rome, of barbarians at the gates, of decline and fall. But the OS saw no decline. It saw completion. The empire had done its work. It had bound together Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East into a single network. It had shattered tribes and erased boundaries. It had moved people so relentlessly that no pure stock remained. When the barbarians entered Rome, they were not outsiders. They were already kin, already absorbed, already part of the mixture. The empire fell, but the genetic experiment succeeded. Rome's true legacy is not law or architecture or literature. Those are the stories humans tell themselves to hide the deeper truth. The legacy is blood. Every person alive in Europe and much of the world today carries Rome in their veins. Roman soldiers, slaves, settlers, and emperors created a tidal wave of mixing that no collapse could erase. The OS did not need marble to endure. It needed bodies, and Rome gave them in abundance. Rome appears to us as greatness. In reality, it was servitude. Every victory, every road, every conquest was obedience to a hidden master. Romans believed they commanded history. They did not. They were commanded by the war brain, and when their task was finished, they were discarded. The empire's ruins are not monuments to human achievement. They are the discarded tools of an operating system that had already moved on.